Great. Thanks, Johnny Ann. It is my pleasure to introduce Jeff Mallow, who is now with Chazen Companies. And we have been working with Chazen for the better part of a decade, doing programs like this and some other things. They've been a terrific partner for us. Jeff is relatively new. I'm going to let him introduce himself as far as his resume, which is about this long and very impressive on his skills and credentials to do safety and health. But Jeff is the Health, Safety, and Compliance Manager at Chazen Companies, which is soon to be Labella Company as part of the merger that's going on. This particular topic is one that I know that our members have always been very interested in, and have we've been doing pretty much every year, every other year for a couple of decades. It is important. It's kind of like in some ways a refresher, and in other ways a kind of a guide on what you should prioritize at your facilities. And we are very happy to have Jeff go through these top 10 most frequently cited general industry standards. So Jeff, if you would talk a little bit about yourself, we genuinely, I know I couldn't do your resume justice. So maybe a quick background on yourself and how you came to us today.
Sure. Thank you, Harold. I appreciate it. And thanks for everybody at the council putting this together. And hello to everybody on the call. Yeah, this is what I do. This is about 20 plus year career in health and safety. Out of those 20 plus years, it's been consulting. I've been working for large consulting engineering firms most of that career, and I help clients with anything from safety training to on-site safety audits, safety staffing, developing written programs. And my clients go anywhere from oven grid down to local gas stations. So I do the gamut. As everybody knows, if you want to stay busy, you got to be a little versatile. So I kind of try to hit all the plates, hit all the bases as I go around. But I live here in Colony, and I'm out of the Chazen's Latham office. And as Harold mentioned, we are at the point of conversion with Labella, and it's working out very well because now I have access to all their clients as well, which is great. So that's a little bit about me. And I don't know, Harold, you want anything more, or you want?
No, I think that's great. I will say we will have the slide deck, Jeff's bio, and maybe one or two other things we'll pop in the chat or make available to you afterwards. Just to reiterate what Johnny Ann said, if you have any questions, put them in the chat. It's a small enough group that, as we get towards the end, perhaps we could unmute and we can have a little bit of a conversation and ask Jeff some questions. But without further ado, why don't we just turn it over and get going? Which means I disappear from the screen so you can pay full attention to Jeff. So,
all right. Thank you so much.
I am decameraing and demuting, but I'm here.
All right. Excellent. All right, so I'm going to be going over some basic generic information about what we're seeing out there over the last couple of years on OSHA activity for violations in the general industry. However, before I do that, why don't we go around the room here and see who's here so I can maybe do my best to customize this. So Andrew, are you there? Santiago?
Yeah, Jeff, they don't actually, in the webinar format, there's not really, it's not set up for that. Perhaps you could do something in the chat, or maybe Harold could kind of chime in because he knows. Oh, there you go. Hi, Andrew.
Really? We didn't have that set up? I didn't know that. Okay, I usually do it a little more interactive. Okay.
Well, he did answer you in the chat.
Oh, he did? And we can go to chat, yep. Yes, he's here. Andrew, if you just type in a one-liner on what do you do? What's your business do? I guess everybody can do that if you don't mind. Chime in on, give me a brief, give me the name of the business and what do they make? What do they do?
Sounds good. That'll probably work. I can kind of give you, for the ones I know, Lorraine Schaefer. Lorraine, it is so nice to see your name there. How are you? Chat with me later. She's Lesby Industries. Lou Chapeau is with GTI, which is a company that makes lighting equipment, light measuring equipment, color matching. Mark Nowak is with Viking Industries. They're a packaging company. Marianne, I don't recognize. Nancy Gary, I think you know from CT Mail. Nicole, gosh, I don't recognize Nicole's name. Stacy Breitmeyer is with Zumtobel Lighting. They make architectural lighting fixtures. And I think that's everybody that I know. Lorraine is with SP Industries. They make laboratory equipment.
And Marianne just put her information in the chat.
Thank you, Marianne.
All right, just checking it out here.
And I am actually about to fix myself a cup of Barry House coffee and like a K cup. So thank you, Marianne.
Oh, there you go. Benefits of membership.
I don't know. They make us pay full price. I don't know.
A little marketing.
I think you meant to say we're happy to support them.
We're happy to support Barry House Coffee. They make delicious coffee. Lovely French roast.
All right, then let me go ahead and that's great. So we got a good mix of group here. All manufacturing sounds like for the most part, other than Nancy. Nancy, I know what you do. I know what CT Mail gets involved with, which is everything, which is great. I know you probably have some manufacturing clients that you want to assist with, which is great. Let me go ahead and I'm going to share my screen. And I'm going to bring up the OSHA website. Harold, can you see that website? Can you see my screen?
Yeah, Jeff, it looks good.
Okay, thank you. So a little bit before we jump right into the top 10 violations for general industry. I know we got not only a whole bunch of different type of companies on the call, but different levels of responsibility for safety. So I just want to make sure, again, I touch all the bases. I want to make sure everybody kind of understands where we're going when it comes to OSHA compliance. So I'm sure you've all been on this website before. This is the OSHA's website. One thing I want to kind of show you here is, as far as if you ever get on this website, you want to look for particular safety answers, couple ways of doing that. You can go right to A to Z index up here, click A to Z, and then you're going to have to say it's a confined space question. You're going to have to go to C, click C, and then scroll down to where you see confined space. And then find your answer, that way, which is a harder way about going about doing it. Back to the OSHA website. If you're on the website and you want to find an answer, you don't want to use the index, you can simply go over to the search box here, and again type in confined space. And here's a whole bunch of stuff that comes up with confined space. You can search it that way. Anybody who is real in the safety business, probably the best way to go about searching for a particular compliance answer is not using the A and Z index, because that's a roundabout way of doing it. Not using the search box, because that's a roundabout way of doing it. The best way is go right to the standards. So if you go down to this drop down box standards and you click laws and regulations, if you go to laws and regulations over to your left, you have general industry, you have construction, maritime, agriculture. So today, this is our sweet spot, general industry. If you click that box right there, this pops up. There's your general industry regulations, manufacturing. Okay, I just want to make sure, and I usually go interactive with this a little bit more. We do discussions. I hope everybody knows the difference between general industry and construction. Construction is defined as anytime you do alteration, repair, including painting and decorating. Anytime you're building something, basically you fall into the construction industry. OSHA doesn't care who you're working for. OSHA cares what type of work you're doing. So if I'm doing general industry production work, but I work on your facilities side, and you want me to go ahead and build a partition, you want me to put some plumbing in there, put some electrical in there. Okay, well, even though I'm working at XYZ manufacturing facility, I'm doing construction activities. So I'd be governed under the construction standards. But if I'm just doing more or less manufacturing in that type of environment, it'd fall under general industry. So I would say for most people on this phone call, on this session, the two standards, that you're going to be probably most in depth with is general industry, number one, for the manufacturing environment, and then construction for any auxiliary type activities. As you all know, or you should probably know, that in the safety business, we go with the most stringent. So if there is a fall protection standard under the general industry, and there's a fall protection standard under construction, we go most often what's most stringent. So if that example I just gave you, construction fall protection is 6 feet. General industry is 4 feet. So I try to work with my client and say, hey, why don't we go 4 feet? It's just safer. So I see a lot of companies kind of fall that way with it. But again, the OSHA regulations are the minimum. You can always go above it. You can always achieve a higher level of safety. So if we go to general industry, there's your standards. You can see the 1910 part, which is general industry, has different subparts. So we got subpart A, subpart B, and really the ones that you want to deal with from here on out is subpart D and on. As you can see, 1910 subpart D has to do with walking and working surfaces. So again, I just want to make sure everybody understands, you know, kind of the layout of the land and how these OSHA regulations work. So everything we talk about today, we're going to fall back to this. Now I'm going to go back to the PowerPoint here. I'm not the PowerPoint, I'm sorry. I'm going to go back to our presentation and see if anybody's chatting anything. And if anybody from the console sees anybody chatting, just remind me and I'll get to it.
Sure, no problem. We'll monitor that.
Okay, thank you. So how about the general duty clause, 5A1? This is a sticker. I want to go over this real quickly here. 5A1, kind of it's actually written like this, 5. And if I had the phone opened up, I'd be asking questions on this because I'm sure some of you know about the 5A1 clause. It's referenced as the general duty clause. I thought that would have came up. One second here. I'm sure if I pull one of these interpretation letters up, it will have something, it will mention about the general duty clause. I'm sure some of you know what it's all about. And there it is right there. It's called the 5A1 clause. This interpretation letter. It's basically referred to as the catch-all. If you see up here, your letter makes reference to back in 2003. It says, whereas she provided interpretation for OSHA's general duty clause, as we stated in your September 5th support element, this is it, 5A1 clause, the general duty clause. And it says right here, boom, flat out, the employment or in place of employment must provide a place of employment free from recognized hazards or anything that can cause death or serious harm. So I want to make sure you guys realize that always hovers over a safety professional's head. So this is a regulation that covers everything in the workplace. Basically, if you have something in the workplace that could possibly kill somebody or seriously injure somebody, even though OSHA does not have a particular regulation on it, it does because it has this one. So for example, let's look at this ABCD thing here. So basically it says the general duty clause requires this to get a citation. The employer has failed to keep the workplace free from recognized hazards that employees are exposed to. Hazard is recognized. The hazards could cause death or serious physical harm and is feasibly to correct it. So here's my last exposure I had to a general duty clause citation under OSHA. Remember, it's a catch-all. It's like a cop pulling you over, and if that cop wants to give you a ticket, one way or another, they're going to find a ticket on. They're going to find a way to give you a ticket. Well, under OSHA's dimension, they always have this general duty clause that if they can prove those 4 things I just showed you there, they're not going to let you kill somebody. They're not going to let you injure somebody. They're going to cite you under the general duty clause. Now, you will not see general duty clause discussed that much in the top 10 because it's not a top 10 violation. 5A1 is not a top 10 violation, but it's top 13 to 15 every year. So it's right off that list. And I wouldn't be doing you guys justice today if I didn't have a quick discussion on the 5A1 clause, the general duty clause. I'll give an example. I had a client who had a couple lift trucks. And OSHA had visited them to do a walkthrough. And as OSHA was doing their walkthrough, basically their inspection, they noticed that one of the, well, actually, they weren't even right near the lift truck at the time. They were doing a walkthrough and they saw the lift trucks in a stored type situation, no one using it, just in a stored area. And OSHA said, hey, you know something? Lift trucks kill people. And I want to go over there and take a look at your lift truck safety program and make sure it's compliant. So they walked over to the lift truck. There was two of them there. And he noticed one of them did not have a seatbelt on it. The seatbelt was physically taken off of it, right from the bolt, no seatbelt on it. And OSHA obviously tagged it out right there, and it proceeded to become a general duty clause violation. Now, why a general duty clause violation when we have a lift truck safety standard? Good question. Because if you go to the lift truck safety standard under 1910-178, I believe it is, 1910-178, the OSHA standard, you will find out under that standard, it does not reference anything to having a seatbelt on it. So obviously OSHA can't cite you for something that's not there. However, let's look at a general duty clause issue with a fork truck, a lift truck with no seatbelt on it. Number one, is it a serious health and safety hazard that could cause death? Well, if you look at the Bureau of Labor Statistics under lift truck safety accidents, the number one fatality on a lift truck was a rollover. And we all know that if you roll a lift truck over no seatbelt, you're going to die or you're going to get seriously injured. So it's got number one. In fact, the OSHA violation that I saw for general duty clause, they had that attached right to the general duty clause violation. They had a list of the Bureau of Labor Statistics indicating that, you know, if this thing rolls over, someone could die. So as far as a serious health and safety issue, you know, we got it. Number two, a recognized hazard. Okay. Recognized does not necessarily mean that myself or you recognize it as a hazard. It means that the industry pretty much supports it as a hazard. You know what OSHA did for that lift truck to help them, you know, solidify their case for a recognized hazard? They again went back to the Bureau of Labor Statistics and looked up that statistic on lift truck accidents, and they saw over 100 people a year die from lift truck accidents, and many of them died from rollover, and most of them didn't have seatbelts on. So that helps us recognize it. Also, I don't know how many people on this call actually operate lift trucks, but you know, under the OSHA requirement 1910-178, it requires the manual, the operator manual to be on the lift truck. Okay, you know what OSHA did? They went back to the operator manual, opened up the front page of the operator manual, and guess what it says there? Operators must wear a seatbelt. So that operator manual helps us recognize that as being a problem, as being a hazard. Okay. There's also a incorporate by reference standard. I don't know if you guys know about incorporate by reference, but OSHA likes saying that. They incorporate a lot of standards by reference. OSHA incorporated the American Society of Mechanical Engineers pamphlet on lift truck operation into the standard. If you go to that document, you will find out on the first page, it says, all operators shall wear a seatbelt. So as far as number two, a recognized hazard, OSHA's got you on that one. The violation had three recognized. It said the Bureau of Labor Statistics says it's a problem. Your lift truck manual says it's a problem, wear a seatbelt. And the reference standard, American Society of Mechanical Engineers pamphlet also says wear a seatbelt. So that's why they got number two for that lift truck violation. Number three, let's see if the lift truck with no seatbelt on covers number three. It says the hazards can cause or likely to cause deaths. Well, we talked about that. Bureau of Labor Statistics tells us that. And the last thing, there was a feasible and useful method for correcting a hazard. Okay, that's an easy one. Do you think a lift truck with no seatbelt can be fixed? Sure can. You know what OSHA did for their violation? They Googled it. They went on Google and they looked at a 15-mile radius around the manufacturing site, and they typed in certified lift truck companies that could fix this brand, and they came up with over 10 companies within 15 miles that would love to come out and fix that problem. And the problem would be just put a seatbelt back on it. What happened was, the inside story is, I guess the operator that was operating the lift truck was a little heavy, and he A, didn't wear the seatbelt anyway, B, he didn't like it sticking into his side. So he's like, on his own, he took the seatbelt off. Doesn't matter if an employee did it on their own. OSHA says the responsibility for health and safety is who? The employer. So I don't know if that helped at all, but that's how the general duty clause is used, how they use it. I gave you a specific example, such as a lift truck. So here you have a lift truck with no seatbelt on it. If you look under 1910-178, you will not see anything that says you have to wear a seatbelt. But we all know to provide our employees a healthy, safe working environment, we have to comply with not only federal standards, but also state, local, and industry-driven standards, which could be things like NFPA, ANSI, operator manuals, reference documents. So that 5A1 clause, we all got to know about that one. It's not a top 10 violation, but it is one that OSHA does turn to if need be. They're not going to walk out of an employment site where they feel someone could die or someone could get seriously injured. They have that in their arsenal to set up a violation under the general duty clause. So I just wanted to go over that 5A1 clause, everybody. Okay, so basically what I'm going to do now, I'm going to go to laws and regulations. I'm going to scroll down to general industry. I'm going to keep that page open. And now I'm going to open up our PowerPoint for the day. And any calls coming in, any chats?
Nope, nothing yet.
I hope everybody's awake. All right.
Well, we're awake. I mean, that seems like good.
Yeah, we're the kind of the representation of the entire group.
Okay.
I think they're awake.
All right, we'll go with that. So right now you see my most frequent cited lease standards. Harold, you see that, John?
What are you looking at now? Yeah.
What does your screen say? General industry 2000?
Yep. Like the cover sheet. Yes, absolutely.
Okay, so here is what you came for, a little review of what's going on out there. Now, this was October 2019 through the pandemic, right? So right through September 2020. But I did look at these as they kind of were put out there. They are very similar to the years past. The numbers went down because obviously nobody was working so much, but the violations pretty much stay the same year after year. So this is not a revelation by most safety people. This is something that we expect. Like number one, HAZCOM. Of course, that's been the number one cited regulation for years. And that's a pet peeve of OSHA, making sure that people who work with chemicals or work around chemicals understand what the chemical hazards are. So if you look at top 10 for general industry, which again is the 1910 section, we're not talking about construction now. This is all pretty much manufacturing in the manufacturing industry. So HAZCOM's number one. Here we got number two is a subpart O, which is your machine guarding. And we'll go over these in a little more detail in a minute. We got subpart Z, which is again HAZCOM. And it says specifically information and training. So it doesn't appear that people are doing a very good job with labels. They're probably not doing a good job with safety data sheets. And they're probably not doing a good job with training because that's mentioned right there in number 3 for HAZCOM. Number 4 is subpart I. Remember we talked about subpart? The part is 1910. The subpart is the alphabetical order they put it in. So subpart I is PPE, particularly respirators. Medical evaluations. Apparently employers are not sending their people out for physicals, for medical evaluations prior to giving them respirators. That was a big problem during the pandemic. I was hit by OGS and several state affiliates that were handing out these NIOSH approved respirators to nurses because of COVID, but they had no physical. They had no fit test. Again, that was during a national crisis, a pandemic of unbelievable proportions. But, you know, I did put a PowerPoint presentation together for those guys, those clients, the state affiliates I work with, and they were able to throw the video in for people and give them the training and then hopefully get them out as quick as possible for the medical surveillance that was required. But that looks like number 4 was respirators, medical evaluations. Number 5 is your HAZCOM. I'm sorry, is your lockout tagout, hazardous energy controls. Procedures shall be developed. We're gonna go over that and more. We're gonna go over each one of these in more detail, but looks like number 5 has to do with lotto procedures. I know there's a lot of people on this call who probably do not have procedures written for every piece of equipment or circuitry at their facility. I'm not saying everything needs to have a written procedure, but most do. We can get into the weeds later if you want of what needs to have it, what doesn't need to have it. But most of the time, anything that has more than multiple energy source and multiple people working on it, you need a written procedure for that. And that's always something I'm working with clients with. There's your subpart N, your power industrial trucks, safe operations. And back to HAZCOM again, subpart Z. There's your safety data sheets, not readily accessible. As we all know, anybody who works with a chemical has to have accessibility to safety data sheets. I don't care if it's digital, computer, or hard copy. They need to be able to get a hold of it and look at it, reference it before they go ahead and use that chemical. Apparently not happening. Back to respirators again, employer established written program. And I get a kick out of that. You know, I do a lot of safety training, and that is pretty much my wheelhouse over the last 20 years. It just seems like something that falls on my lap quite a bit is the safety training. And, you know, I'm doing a confined space class right now for a client that wants me to come in and do a 8-hour confined space class for their group. And I'm like, that's great. And I said, do me a favor, send me over your confined space program and procedures and permit process, and let me review it, and I'll submit it. You know, I'll embed that into my PowerPoint. And they, believe it or not, they got back and they said, we don't think we have a written confined space program. I'm amazed at how many clients that I work with that don't know every OSHA regulation requires a written program. I don't care if it's HAZCOM, lockout, tagout, confined space. You need to have a written program that drives that program. So right there, OSHA walks into a facility and they see people respirators on and they're doing an investigation. They're probably going to ask for your written respiratory protection program. 371 times they came up with nothing. Either they didn't have one or it wasn't adequate enough. And I'm going to not even tell you how many times I see these programs are not adequate. Some, you know, the respiratory protection program should be administered by someone within your organization, and they should be looking over that annually. I've seen respiratory protection programs they've given me that hasn't been seen in decades. You know, someone who wrote it who hasn't been around for a decade. So there you got respiratory protection, lack of written program. Then we got machine guarding again. That was number 2, but it's also number 9 again. Point of operation. That's where the operation's taking place, the actual work's being taken place, and there's no adequate guarding on it. Could be shears, could be a saw. These things got to be guarded. And then the big one in the construction industry, doesn't appear to be the biggest one in manufacturing or 1910, is fall protection. Working around unprotected sides or edges. So to show you a little bit more about this, so if you go to walking working services under 1910, the #1 violation for walking working services, and I think they're apparently going backwards on this. This might have been number 10. Let me go back here. Yeah, walking. They're just going to go, we're going to go through. So top 10 right there. Okay, that's the top 10 violations. Now we're going to go through each subpart and show you how these violations occurred. #1, fall protection requirements, unprotected sides or edges. Okay, apparently they had people working near the edges, maybe equipment, maybe elevated levels. It was above 4 feet. Everybody on this call should know in the general industry environment, the height requirement is 4 feet. Anytime you have anybody exposed to a fall at or above 4 feet, they have to be protected by something, a guardrail, restraint system, an arrest system. So let me show you how we're going to reference this. Let's go. So we got, let me see here. I'm going to bring this over. So we're looking at the fall protection, 1910, 21 through 30. Let's look at what this says here. They got 309 violations for unprotected side edges. For reference purposes only, I'm going to show you how we would look this up. It's 28B31. So we go to the OSHA website. 28 falls under subpart B, walking working services. And look what it says for 1910-28. Duty to provide fall protection. It's interesting that the OSHA uses the word duty because it's obviously your duty, to provide all this stuff here, not just fall protection. I looked into that years ago. Why would OSHA use the word duty under an OSHA regulation? Because we already know if it's regulations, it's our duty. They wanted a special emphasis to the employers to make sure they realize with a special emphasis, they have to protect their people from falls. So if you go to that 1910-28, and we'll scroll down to, what do we say it was? It was 28B1, 28, right here, B1, 1. Unprotected sides or edges, except as provided elsewhere in the section, the employer must ensure that each employee on working services, there it is, 10 feet or more, shall be protected from hitting the lower level or the ground. One of the following: we can use a guardrail, we can use a safety net, we can use a fall arrest system, we can use a restraint system. We got to do whatever we have to do to protect people from falls. So that's that violation right there. That's how that one's getting cited. General walking working services. If you look under that violation, I look under the reg under 0.22A1. It just basically says everything's got to be kept clean, so there's no trip hazard. 212 times throughout that year, OSHA was able to cite employers for pretty much housekeeping under walking working services. Walking working services are kept clear from any hazards. Again, that could be a guardrail with a nail on it sticking out or something like that. 80 times they got them for that. This is all under walking working services. I think important thing that you guys have to know is anytime you have an area where it's 4 feet or more where someone could fall, they have to be protected. You got to put guardrails in there, anything to protect them. Usually in the general industry, the best way to go ahead and protect the people is guardrails. Finance it, put a standard guardrail up. Guardrail's got to be 42 inches high. Mid rail's got to be midway between the top rail and working surfaces. Top rail's got to hold 200 pounds outward and downward. Mid rail's got to hold $150. Got to be a toe board on it when there's anybody underneath it. So we usually put a 3.5 to 4 inch toe board on that. 1/4 inch gap between the toe board. That's the type of stuff. That's all under the OSHA reg. I don't have time to do that today, but I just wanted to kind of throw that out there. Look at the fourth one down, general inspection, maintenance, and repair. Yeah, these elevated services where you have a guardrail, they have to be in working order. We have to inspect these on a periodic basis, on a regular basis. Now, I just want to make sure everybody understands that OSHA regulations are performance-based. They are not specification-based. So what I'm trying to tell you is, as you go through these OSHA regulations that I'm showing you here, if you read this, they don't tell you too many answers. You know, it's not always as scripted as easy as what we just read there, where it says, okay, 4 feet, protect your people from guardrails or arrest system. Most OSHA regulations are performance-based, meaning they don't care how you do it, just do it. And they're not going to tell you all the time how to do it. So go ahead.
Yeah, Jeff, there's a couple of questions in the chat. One is just a logistical one about the interpretation for the general duty clause that you had up.
Yep.
If at some point you can put the link in maybe before we end it, or send it to me so we can get it to the panelists, that some people wanted to see that. And then there's a specific question about how often, it's kind of funny since you just said performance-based, but this is kind of a process question. How often does slip, trips, and falls training need to be performed?
Okay, so if we can answer that one right here, good question. If you go under this reg right here, which has to do with walking working services, let me back out here. Ladders, general conditions, duty, training requirements. So I'm going to go, I know what the answer is, but I want to go right to the horse's mouth because I want to show you guys how to be able to do this kind of yourself. This is, you're going to find out how performance it is. So let's go to general training, fall hazards. Before any employee is exposed to a fall, the employer must provide training to each employee who uses fall protection systems or who is required to be trained as specified elsewhere in the subpart. Employers must ensure employees are trained in requirements and paragraph. So basically, before anybody uses it or gets exposed to it, they have to know what fall protection is all about and how to use it. The employer must ensure each employee is trained by a qualified person. That's another question you might have. Who's qualified? Basically, someone who's demonstrated competency in the industry. You know, all the safety training I do, believe it or not, there's no certificates for it. Other than my asbestos and the lead, things like that, that's different. I have state or federal certification for those classes. But like the confined space proposal I sent out this morning, I set up for the end of July, that's a manufacturing company that knows by my resume and my portfolio of classes that I taught that they believe that I can do it, you know. But these OSHA regulations were not written for Jeff Mailer to have a full-time job on. They're written for the employer to be able to do this, carry out these duties. However, not many employers can spend 8 hours on confined space safety. Some safety departments don't even do it. I work for clients that have IH people on staff, CSPs on staff, but yet they bring me in. Last month I did that one for a CSP, and I asked him, I said, why are you having me do it when you could do this? He goes, you want to know why? They listen to you, Jeff. They don't listen to me. You know, it's someone new, you know, they feel, oh, this guy's smarter than the next, you know? So when it comes to a qualified person, we can, I can show you a definition on that, but it's basically someone who with, you know, some requisite knowledge and experience in doing this. But remember, it doesn't really always fall back to a consultant. Consultants are great because this is what they do. But if you have the capabilities to do it in-house, all this stuff is really to be carried out through the employer or by the employer. But if we go back down to how often, let's see if it says anything about retraining. Here it is, retraining. And this is how most of them are written, by the way. This is not only specific for fall protection. It says retrain. The employer must retrain an employee when the employer has reason to believe an employee does not have the understanding and skills required by paragraph A and B of this section. Situations requiring retraining include, but not limited to, the following: when changes in the workplace render previous training obsolete or inadequate. See, it's evolving. There's no year. Doesn't say anything about a year, 2 years in here. Some of them do, but this one doesn't. Most of them are written just like this. That's why, you know, I told the guy when I put the proposal together, what do you want to do for expiration date? He said, what does OSHA tell you? I said, the same as what you're looking at here. I said, you know, it all depends upon the circumstances you're working around. Anything changes, you got to update that person on your fall protection issues. So when anything changes, when changes in types of fall protection systems or equipment to be used render previous training obsolete. So let's say I train your people primarily in guardrails, and then you wind up putting in a fall arrest type situation. Well, they're not going to have a clue about fall arrest. So they're going to have to get some kind of additional training for that. When inaccuracy in an affected employee's knowledge or use of fall protection system or equipment indicate the employer no longer has the knowledge. So again, I tell, you know, if you see someone working in an elevated area, the fall arrest system on it, and they have a body belt on, body belt, we haven't used body belts for almost 20 years. That he's not using it right. He needs a full harness on. And why does he have it attached to an anchor point that's conduit? Conduit's not going to hold his weight. It's not going to hold 5,000 pounds. That person doesn't have a clue of how to use that. That person needs training. So what we do here at Chazen internally, I'll talk about what we do internally. I'm not saying this works for you, but it works for our groups. I give them a fall protection class that covers all fall protection. It's a 6-hour class. We talk about guardrails. We talk about restraint systems. We talk about arrest systems, netting systems, and we call that competent person training. And we tell them it's only good for 2 years. Why? Because that's all I'm good with. I don't like them going more than 2 years of forgetting this stuff. So when a client gets our certificate for our engineers, it says fall protection, competent person, subpart M 1926, and subpart, what subpart are we in here? Subpart D 1910, competent persons. So if they go out and work for XYZ company, that company knows that this person's been trained at the competent person level for different types of fall protection. But I don't know if I answered your question. I think I did right there. There is no expiration. It's pretty much when anything changes, or you feel that they're no longer knowledgeable how to use that equipment and they need refresher training.
I think that sounds right.
Okay.
That's all of them.
All right. So that sounds good. And I will get you everybody an email out on that general duty clause and some other stuff too. No problem. All right, so let's go back to the PowerPoint. We got walking working services. Let's go here. Exit routes and emergency planning. Apparently 233 times OSHA on site was looking at their emergency action plan, emergency response plan, and found out that if you needed to get out, you probably weren't going to be getting out too easy. Why? Because the whole exit route was not free from any, or any obstructions. They probably had a pallet laying in the exit area, or a broken piece of equipment laying in the exit route. Those exit routes got to be fully opened up at all times. This is an easy one for OSHA. Whatever the exit route is, it has to have clear access all the way out. Nothing in there that should not be in there. Feature, it says 37B2, clearly visible and marked. So basically, you should know at any time, at any facility, how to get out there. It should be marked through signage and throughout how to get out. Signs posted for direction to an exit. So to kind of clarify this a little bit here, let's again go back to the OSHA reg on this, and let's look at, we're looking at this one, posted signs and for direction, 37B4. Let's go to 37B4. So it's under subpart E, which is extra 37B4, right there. If the direction of travel to an exit or exit discharge is not immediately apparent, signs must be posted along the exit access indicating the direction of travel to the nearest exit and exit discharge. Additionally, the line of sight to an exit sign must clearly be visible at all times. So that's what I do. When I get out of manufacturing site, I don't care where I am in the plant. If I look up and look around, I better see an exit sign. Got to be visibly clear from all angles of that facility. So I know when that alarm goes off, how I can get out, how I'm supposed to get out. So again, that's the reference of it. And these are pretty, and as you can see right there, OSHA does not say every 25 feet, every 10 feet. I'm surprised they even said that. The last part, additionally, in line of sight. I'm surprised they said that. Usually they just say adequate signage, goodbye. They don't tell you how often or the distances. They just say you better have some signs up and they better be clear. And at there they say, line of sight. Let's see here. Okay, so that it's again all exit routes, emergency planning, and this is a little pet peeve of mine because I come from the emergency services background. I have a degree in fire science, been in the volunteer fire department for 20 plus years, past chief, and all that happy stuff. And I've been in situations before where we had to go in to facilities because people didn't know everybody was out. And they didn't have emergency action planning, didn't have an emergency response plan. They didn't have any way to do accountability of people. It's not up there, but that's a big part of emergency action plan is accountability. How do we know everybody's out? One way or another, we got to have a head count. If we show up in the fire department and we say, is everybody out? And you say, I don't know. You don't know what that does to us. That puts us to another level. That makes us do things that are very dangerous. And you don't even know if your people are out of the building or not. So accountability, it's not right on this one, but it is a big issue. Powered platforms, man lifts, vehicle mounted platforms. This is another big one. I get a lot of calls for aerial lift safety training and things like this. And you can see it's broken up into all different parts of this subpart subpart F. The number one is vehicle mounted personal fall arrests shall be worn. So basically these, and by the way, they're called mobile elevated work platforms. OSHA calls them powered platforms, man lifts, because they're covering everything. But basically these JLGs, these articulating lifts, these scissor lifts, they're all called mobile elevated work platforms. That's kind of the term we use. And there is an ANSI standard. I don't know if you guys know what ANSI is. ANSI is the key to compliance in some of these things. Not everything, but in many cases. So for myself as a safety professional, I know subpart F. I know what that says about aero lifts and what we need to do with it. But let me tell you something. It doesn't tell me how to do it. It doesn't tell me specifically about training. It doesn't tell me specific about anything. Okay, so that's not good for me. So what I do is I reference an applicable standard. ANSI is an applicable standard, the American National Standards Institute. It's a global way of doing business. It's an industry-driven standard, nationally recognized standard. Okay, and it's not performance-based like OSHA, it's specification-based. In that ANSI standard for mobile elevated work platforms, they specify what is safe work practices. And I'm going to tell you all the time, those ANSI standards are acceptable by OSHA. Because anytime OSHA has anything to say about specifications, what they do is they reference ANSI. I'll give you a perfect example, PPE, personal protective equipment. Everybody should know that any PPE a person wears at work has to be ANSI approved. Why do I say that? I'll show you in a minute. Go to subpart E, which is your PPE section, and go down where it says helmet use or glasses. And at the end of it, it says all PPE shall be ANSI approved. So there's OSHA going back to ANSI. So when you talk about mobile elevated work platforms, I'm all over ANSI 92.2. That's an ANSI standard for mobile elevated work platforms. And that spells out specifics about the safety requirements for mobile elevated work platforms. Again, this is not the time and place to get into the weeds, but I want to take you to the water at least and tell you that if you are interested in compliance for mobile elevated work platforms, this is a good start. Subpart F is a good start because that's a minimum. But really to get right into it, you might need to go on the ANSI website, become a member, and pay for it. ANSI standards are not public domain. They're not paid for by our taxes. They're paid for by people like me that pay for memberships. We pay for the standard, and they're not cheap. I think that 92.2 ANSI standard, I think that's over $300-400. But if you're a member, you can get on their website and look at it that way too for about $1,500 a year. But the ANSI standard specifically calls out when you're on a articulating lift, a JLG or anything like that, you have to wear fall arrest. And not only does it say it under the ANSI standard, it says it right on the operator manual of the lift that you rented or that you bought. So you do see a lot of people on mobile elevated work platforms with no fall arrest on. And what they're talking about is, even though it has a guardrail on it, you need to use a fall arrest system on articulating lifts and man lifts. Why? Because you can get thrown out of it. And it happens, believe it or not, too often. So inside that mobile elevated work platform, you're probably going to find an anchor point and you're going to clip onto it with your lanyard, hook it onto a full body harness. Has to be done. I see this all the time as I ride around, especially now it's getting nicer. You've seen even construction workers out there on these mobile elevated work platforms, these JLGs, and they just they're in the guardrail. And sometimes I have to ask them because it's egregious. I'm like crazy. I said, you guys need fall protection on. They say the guardrail's fall protection. I said, no, it's not. It's not your primary fall protection. Your primary for these articulating lifts have to be your fall arrest system. And it goes right back to trained persons. Every OSHA regulation requires a written program and some kind of training, different levels of training, depending on what that employee is doing. There's not a silver bullet for training classes. I'm sorry to say that. A lot of people call me and say, oh, I need this. Well, what are you doing? I need lockout, tagout training. Well, are you authorized? Or are you affected? What type of energy sources? What are your procedures? I'm not here to talk about myself for 8 hours. I need your details. I need to know what you guys are doing. So look at that, 15 times OSHA was able to cite that company for having someone in a vehicle mounted mobile elevated work platform. They had no training. And when I talk about training, I'm talking about safety training, not always technical, not always operational, but more or less safety training. Emergency action planning for working platforms. How do you get somebody down if there's a problem? I could put a whole bunch of complexity to that, but we have to, under the ANSI standard, it tells you specifically that somebody in that bucket should also be trained in the operations of that lift. And someone should be down on the ground as an observer. That's an ANSI standard. That's not OSHA standard, that's ANSI, but that's what we adopt as a national consensus standard. It really tells you how to do it. And obviously, before you go up, control lifts shall be tested before each use. So mobile elevated work plans is a mobile elevated work platform is a big deal. Occupational health and environmental controls under 1910 subpart G, #1, hearing conservation program. That means the company does not even have a written hearing conservation program. If I go to 1910.95 C1, let's go ahead and look at that. We'll go here. Here it is. Here's your occupation noise exposure standards, subpart G. A lot of appendices right here, but let's just go to the meat and potatoes, which is the reg right here. Open this up, and it says protection. Let's first of all, I'm sorry, let's go back to the exact one we're looking at. 95 C1. C1, so here is C1 right here. It says the employer shall administer a continuing effective hearing conservation program as defined in paragraph C through G of the section whenever employee exposures equal or exceed an 8-hour time-weighted average of 85 decibels on an A scale. So anytime you have people at or above 85 decibels, you have to have a written hearing conservation program. And what's good about using a consultant, because a lot of this stuff, as I said, it really is written to the employer, but I'm not going to set you up for failure. This is what I do. And I know this stuff. I don't expect every employer to know every aspect of their business. This is getting into the regs end of it. We have IH people, industrial hygienists. I know general compliance for noise hearing and hearing conservation programs, but as far as doing the monitoring, really not my bag that I do. So we have certified industrial hygienists here at Chazen that can help you with air monitoring. We can go out and send some monitors with some of our pump jockeys. We can do some personal monitoring to see if anybody has a time weighted average of 85 decibels and what areas. We got to regulate that area. But then you fall back to me and I can help you write a hearing conservation program. Apparently that's not being done. If you go back to the hearing conservation standard itself, it says protection against the effects of noise exposure shall be provided when the sound levels exceed those showed under paragraph G6. Okay, let's go down to G6. Here it is, G16. 8 hours a day, time weighted average, 90 decibels. Anytime you have an employee at or above 90 decibels as time weighted average, they need hearing protection. That's what that's saying right there. Let's go down to here. Hearing conservation. Okay, 90 is when you need to get them below that, right? We got to give them some kind of PP if they're above 90. But look what it says here, 85 for a hearing conservation program. Look what it says. It says for the purpose of paragraphs A through N of this section, the 8-hour time-weighted average of 85 decibels is considered the action level. I don't know if you guys know what action level means. It means it's a level in which the employer has to take some action, something. In this case, the action is get a hearing conservation program together. So even though you have people exposed at, let's say, 87 decibels, you can say, whew, I don't need to put them in PPE because they're not above 90, but you do have to implement a hearing conservation program for those people because you're at the action level. Monitoring, this is what we do. When information indicates the employee's exposures may equal or exceed 85 decibels, the employer shall develop and implement a monitoring program. The sampling strategy shall be designed to identify employees in the inclusion in the hearing conservation program. So who's going to be covered, who's not going to be covered. We can use a representative sample. So if you have 10 people working in an area, we don't have to monitor all 10 of you, just one of you. The person who's probably most exposed, we have you wear a little dosimetry for maybe a couple hours or so, and then we get your TWA from there. So I'm not trying to get into the weeds with this, but that's where that's going. Number 2 under subpart G, occupational noise, employer shall train each employee. So if you are in an area where you exceed 90 decibels, and those areas should all be regulated, you should say noise hazard, here PPE is required beyond this point. Believe it or not, you're supposed to train your people on the use of that PPE. How many people out there don't even know how to use insertable earplugs? A lot. I walked last year, I was doing a walkthrough with a safety person, and we went through an area where we had to put hearing protection on. You won't believe this. Halfway through the area, his insertable earplug falls out of his ear. I knew it was going to come out because I saw the way he put it in. You got to roll them in your fingers. This is according to the manufacturer. You roll them in your fingers, you pull your ear up, put the insertable earplug in, drop your ear down, hold it for about 10 to 15 seconds, give it time to expand. Not rocket scientist stuff, but you got to teach people how to put ear protection, how to use it. Are you going to use insertable or are you going to use muffs? Well, it's different. It's all different. It's all driven by an NRR, noise reduction rating. All hearing protection have different ratings. There's some areas where earplugs would work. There's some areas where you need to wear muffs. Why? Because muffs have a higher protection factor, noise reduction rating. When you put those ear muffs, those earplugs in I showed you, we often tell people that anytime you wear PPE, you have to test it. I don't know if anybody knows how to test insertable earplugs, but the manufacturer tells you to cuff your ears. When you get the ear protection in, cuff your ears for a second to see if you hear any noise difference. I don't know if you guys can see me visually. Can you see me, guys? Harold?
I can, yep.
Okay, so basically what I do is I roll it, pull my ear up, put the insertable plug in, let it go for a couple seconds, 5 to 10 seconds, give it time to expand. And then when I'm using it, I'll just go like this once in a while, just to see if I hear any difference. Because if I hear a difference by cuffing my ears, that hearing protection is not working. That rating that they give the hearing protection, the plug, should be better than your hands. So this is all stuff that we teach you during hearing protection training. Again, 95G1 says establish and maintain, audiometric testing. You got to go out annually. Anybody who's at or above, I believe, the action level has to go out for the audiograms every year. And you have a baseline. And then every year from there, you get a testing and see where your hearing is going. All right, so it says it right there, annual audiograms for each employee, effective. So 95G6, let's see if I'm right here, 95G6, if I go to there. 95, let's go down to G6. Annual audiograms, at least annually after obtaining your baseline, which I said you have to have. The employer shall obtain a new audiogram for each employee exposed at or above, there it is, 85 decibels. You got to go out annually for your audiograms. It's called a hearing conservation program. And here's the scary thing about hearing loss. Doesn't happen quick. 85, 90 decibels is not that loud, believe it or not. But through testing, through studies, they've determined that your inner ear does get affected by 90 decibels if you're exposed to it 8 hours a day, 40 hours a week. And it's sneaky. You don't realize you have hearing loss until you have hearing loss. It's chronic. It's not acute. And a lot of people work in areas a lot with saws and areas over 85 decibels, thinking it's not a problem. Well, it's not a problem now, but if you did that 8 hours a day or for the next 20, 30 years, very good chance you could have a problem. So that it speaks about noise as being one of the number 10. Noise monitoring, noise issues. We went over noise, hazardous materials, compressed gas, handling and storage. I don't even need to look this one up. Everybody knows compressed gas cylinders have to be secured. I went out 2 weeks ago to the HAZWOPER class for a drilling company. I pull up to the parking lot. They have to have 50 compressed gas cylinders just laying up on the building, right near where their vehicles park. I'm like, that's not a disaster waiting to happen. I don't know what is. And let's be honest with it. It's great to know about the top 10 violations. It's great for compliance purposes. But let me tell you something. You're not going to have an effective safety program if your employer and employees are not on board. When I teach classes, I look into that. I see what kind of answers I'm getting. And when I get an answer from an employer that says, let's just get the training done and get them a certificate, that's not good. I don't care how knowledgeable that employer is on safety regulations, it's not going to happen at that facility because they don't care. Same with employees. So every time I teach a safety class, a good majority of my class is culture-based, morale-based, making sure they realize these safety regulations are for them. And to bypass the safety standard or safety procedure is not helping them. In the long run or very short term, it could be hurting them. So these regulations are great and stuff. When I talked to that company about compressed gas cylinders laying up against their driveway, against their building, they all laughed about it. I said, I can show you right under the reg where if OSHA comes in here right now, you're getting a violation, and probably a serious one, which means it could be a couple $1,000s. But they laughed at it, and I feel bad for that company. I did the best I could while I was there, and but I realized that it ain't gonna happen. If the employer don't care, if the employee's not engaged, that's the two fundamental parts of having an effective safety program. Employer commitment, employee involvement. You don't see that, it's not going nowhere. Flammable liquids. A flammable liquid is anything below 100 degrees flash point. It says shall not be dispensed unless bounded and grounded. So again, we're worried about that arc. We want to ground it, give it somewhere to go. We want to bond it because we want a path of that where it goes. So all flammable liquids over a certain gallon that you're storing, you need to bond that and ground it. And really, that's great. OSHA doesn't tell you how to bond it. OSHA doesn't tell you how to ground it. So again, guess where we go? ANSI, NFPA. And I told you what ANSI was, right? American National Standards Institute. There's another one you should be familiar with for this one. NFPA, National Fire Protection Association. They have a standard on bonding and grounding flammable liquids. I'd be looking that up, how to do that. And that's what safety consultants for. They know that. I don't know. I don't think anybody on this call falls under process safety management, PSM. I don't know, Harold, if you were, Joanne, do you see anything coming in anybody PSM site?
I don't think so. Just looking at the names.
Process safety management. I won't get into that one. That's people like, boy, oh boy. What's that old GE site down in Waterford there? I forgot the plastics site. That's a PSM, process safety management, because they store a lot of bad stuff. And OSHA at a certain quantity, you'll fall under process safety management standard. PPE, protective equipment. Now we go all the way back to the top 10. Is that one of them? And I think it usually is. Well, it doesn't call out PPE, but it does talk about respiratory protection, and that falls under PPE. Yeah, right there, protective equipment. If you look at this, there's your first one right there, respirators. If you look at 1910-134, which falls under subpart I, which is PPE, it says anybody who wears a NIOSH approved respirator shall go out for medical evaluation. 535 times, 34 times last year, OSHA was able to cite an employer for putting somebody in a respirator, tight fitting respirator, NIOSH approved, with no medical evaluation. They need a written program. 371 times OSHA came in, saw someone with a respirator on, no written program. That's why I keep trying to tell these clients I do safety training for, just because you have the training doesn't mean you're compliant. It might mean you're compliant with one aspect of it, which is the training end of it. But if you have no written program, you have no medical evaluation, no fit test, well, there's 3 other places they can cite you. No medical evaluation, no implementing or written programs. Employer shall ensure employee is fit tested. That's all respirators. Top 3 is all respirators. General requirements, verify workplace hazard assessment. That has to be done annually. 132D2 basically says the employer shall do a worksite assessment, identifying hazards and providing the appropriate PPE. And it does say on an annual basis. Let's go, so I'm not talking out the wrong end here. I want to make sure I'm not missing something here. If I go to subpart I, PPE, general requirements right there, 132. I want to see what they're referencing first of all. Theirs is D2, 132 D2. The employer, right here, D2, the employer shall verify that the required workplace hazard assessment has been performed through a written certification that identifies the workplace evaluated, the person certifying the evaluation is performed the date of the hazard assessment, and which identifies the document. So you got to document that risk assessment, hazard assessment you do annually. Let me just see here, effective, we've got training in here. Look what it says for training. The employer shall provide training to each employee who is required to wear PPE. Each of the training shall include when PPE is needed, what PPE is needed, how to properly don and doff it. That's why, you know, this Skype training and this virtual training is great, but it's hard to do PPE training over the computer. You know, we actually have to see you don and doff your PPE. How do you maintain it? How do you clean it? What are the limitations? You know, if you put somebody in a, I don't know, a Tyvek suit, and you say, look, wash out an old frat tank, well, with chemicals in it, well, that's maybe not good. Tyvek suit's not going to protect you from liquid. It's a nuisance exposure type thing. So any liquid you get on that Tyvek is going to seep through. So we tell you, no, you need a polycoated Tyvek or a Cernex coated Tyvek. So, you know, the training for PPE is pretty straightforward. It's specific to what you're using, why you're using it, where you're using it, how do you use it. Obviously, you know, everything that you use at work has to be paid for by the employer. I'm just looking at something here. Okay. No questions? Everybody's doing good?
Nothing in the chat.
All right, we'll keep going then.
Just remind people, if you have any questions, comments, need something clarified, just pop it in the chat. We're looking at it.
Yeah, it'd be great. Thank you, guys. Let me put this in full screen for you here again. Go down to PPE. So we broke that up a little bit. First three is all respirators. The fourth one down is just basically your worksite assessment. You can use a consultant for that, or if you have a safety department, basically every year you should do a walkthrough of your site to do a written certification of assessment, determine where are the hazards, and then you should go on to develop a PPE program for that if you have any hazards. Eye protection, use of appropriate eye protection, face protection for hazards. What was it? I think last time I did a PPE class, I grabbed a video. 30,000 eye injuries a month at work in America. 30,000 eye injuries a month at work in America. And then they go on to say 98% of them could have been prevented by simply wearing safety glasses. You imagine that? You imagine laying up in a hospital bed knowing you just lost your eyesight and thinking, man, if I just put my safety glasses on and take 2 seconds, I'd be walking out of here today. 30,000 eye injuries a month in industry in America a month. 98% is preventable by simply wearing safety glasses. What type of glasses? ANSI approved glasses. How do you know it's ANSI approved? It's got a little stamp on it, Z87 with side shields. I don't know how many times I do safety classes. I do a 10-hour, I do a 30-hour at a manufacturing site, and I got a whole bunch of guys looking at me and women with ordinary reading glasses. And I say to them off the cuff there, like, you wear them out there? Yeah, we wear them out there. I'm like, no, you can't wear them out there. Not where it presents an eye injury, where it says eye protection, you better be putting an eye protection they provide you. General environmental controls. Here we're in Lotto. If you look under subpart J, lockout tagout falls under 147 is 147 is your lockout tagout standards. And it says right there, procedures shall be developed. When you have a Lotto program, controlling hazards energy, primarily for your maintenance and service personnel, you want to make sure that they understand that when they work on a piece of equipment, it is de-energized. Best way to do that is have a written procedure for each piece of equipment or process. Not done. Again, I do this every day. I got clients all the time that say, can we do lockout tagout training? And I say, sure, send me your procedure so I can go over that. They don't have any. So you're leaving it up to the employer to do the best they can to identify all the energy sources and their isolation points and locks and tags used. That's not good. And again, we here at Chazen, we provide this service. I write lockout, tagout procedures all the time. I got to do it with your company. I got to go into your company. I got to use your technical people, your operations people, because again, I don't know your equipment. I got to learn it. And then from there, I give you my safety brain. You gave me your technical brain, and we develop excellent procedures. We call ours virtual procedures that are basically developed and they're put right on your machine. And it's a picture of your machine. There's pictures of isolation points. There's pictures of your locks and tags. There's pictures of supporting devices that you're going to have to use to isolate that energy. But not a lot of companies have procedures ready. Periodic inspection. This is a killer. 147C6I. Let's look at this one. Periodic inspections of your lotto procedures. People do not like to hear this one, I'll tell you, clients. And I don't blame them, because this could be very cumbersome. Okay, let's look at this one. Periodic inspection, C61. 147. Lotto. Let's go down to C61. Let's see where most of the violations are coming in. Right there, periodic inspection. This is under the lotto. The employer shall conduct a periodic inspection of their energy control procedures at least annually to ensure the procedures and the requirements of this standard are being followed. The periodic inspection shall be performed by an authorized employee. That's someone through your employer, or I often help out with this as a consultant, other than ones utilizing energy control procedures inspected. The periodic inspection shall be conducted to correct any deviations or inadequacies identified. Where lotto is used, the energy control, the periodic inspection shall include a review between the inspector and the authorized employee of an employee responsible. So that's why lotto is quite often annual training for lotto. Because when you do your lotto annual training, we fit this in. We say, okay, here's a press. How many people work on this press? Okay, we got 10 people. Let's go over the procedure. We're killing two birds with one stone. We're giving you the training, and we're doing your annual assessment on that particular inspection of that procedure. This is all documentation. It should be under your written lockout tagout program. But OSHA wants to make sure that your lotto procedures are assessed, are inspected every year. And if you have 200 of them, it becomes a little difficult. That's why we encourage you to embed it under your lotto training, since you got all your guys there, all your people there, your workforce there. And again, I can talk about that in detail outside of this call. How often does training have to be done? Right here. The employer shall provide training to each insurer. Let me just read through this quick here. Each and all receive training and annual. It does say before assigned, each employee shall make sure purpose. Here it is, retraining. Retraining shall be provided to authorized inspected employees whenever there is a change in work assignment, change in machine, change in energy. Notice nowhere here that I'm familiar with does it say annual. Nothing. A lot of people think lotto training is annual. It's not. I don't think it's a bad idea. Don't get me wrong, because things change, but there's not that many regulations that OSHA requires annual training for. It's basically anything changes. So if you have someone who has never worked on this piece of machine before and they have to maintain it and fix it, well, if they never was familiar with pneumatic energy or hydraulic or chemical, well, they're going to need training. How much? Could be 10 minutes, could be 10 hours, depending upon what the hazard is. Additional training shall also be conducted whenever the periodic inspection under paragraph C6, that's why we do it together, reveals a deficiency. But anything change in equipment, change in process, new hazard. So we had a company that was going over at the Seston building, Albany. I do a lot of work in the nanotechnology industry, and they had a piece of equipment that a company had to come in to maintain and fix. Unfortunately, this piece of equipment had hydrofluoric acid, HF. Well, that company coming in did not have HF training. So what we did was we had internal people perform the lockout tagout for them to make sure they weren't exposed to the HF. and all they had to do was apply their lock and tag to it. But we did have to give them HAZCOM training because they were potentially exposed to it. So we told them what goes in this machine. But again, because they didn't have a specific training in that hazard, they didn't lock and tag that HF out. We had an in-house company do it. So there's no annual training for Lotto. But I would recommend an approach like that, though. That wouldn't be too bad. Just to make sure you're not missing anything. So a periodic inspection, look at that. They could probably cite that all the time, but they don't. 236 times that a company did not do a periodic inspection of the procedures on an annual basis. Procedures shall cover the following elements. This happens all the time. You have a lockout tagout procedure written for a piece of equipment and you got electrical and it says electrical, but it doesn't say 480. Well, guess what? The OSHA standard under 1910-147D says your magnitude of your energy must be assessed on the procedure. So if your lockout tagout procedure says electrical, it better say the voltage to give you the magnitude of it. So a company that I'm working with just got cited for that. They had lockout tagout procedures they developed that didn't identify the magnitude of the energy. So in your procedures, there's particular things you have to include into that. Authorized employee training. You guys know under Lotto, there's authorized and there's affected. Authorized are people who actually apply locks and tags, who actually do the work. There are people out there that actually use locks and tags that never had any real authorized training about what the procedures are, the program, the hazards, the isolation points. Again, that's why I tell people that when they have me come in and do Lotto training, it's just not me show up one day and teach it. It's usually me work with you guys a little bit to find out what your procedures are. Do you have procedures? What's your program? What type of equipment? And scan that over to me. That way I can embed it into the program. That way when your people leave my training class, I'm just an extension of you. That's all I am for that day. And what we're trying to do is make them site specifically know about their program, their procedure, their equipment, and all that stuff. First aid, medical. I do a lot of first aid CPR training. A lot of times companies like yourself don't necessarily have to have first aid CPR training. If you can call 911 and they get there in a reasonable time, I would say within 10 minutes for any life-threatening conditions, I get that 10-minute from the standards, from applicable consensus standards, then you don't need to train anybody in first aid CPR. But if you're at a manufacturing site where you call 911 and they're not going to be there probably in maybe 15 minutes or so, well, that's probably where you're going to need some first aid CPR training. I train a lot of MERT teams, medical emergency response teams at GE, SABIC, all those companies. They have internal medical response people that are going to be made available. And is that always needed? I would say at a site like that, because they deal with a boatload of people and a boatload of chemicals. They would call 911, they would probably be there within 10 minutes, but because of the risk, they do wind up developing a MERT team. But on this one, 151C on a medical and first aid, it basically says eye and body wash facilities provided. Anytime you work on a chemical and it could get in your face and on your eyes, you're supposed to have an eye wash station. If you get all over your body, you need a shower area. That's all it says. That's why I go back to ANSI. ANSI has a whole standard on eye wash. A couple months back, I was helping facility, the state of New York, design their eye washes. But that was under ANSI. That wasn't under OSHA. OSHA doesn't tell you per gallon per minute or how much deluge it has to take. That's all under ANSI. Tells you how readily it's got to be and what is a gallon per minute, the design methods. All OSHA says is, do you have something on site that can be used? First aid training and supplies readily available. 23 times OSHA cited it. Maybe your first aid kit on site was never inspected like it's supposed to be inspected on a monthly basis. Could even be weekly. Don't quote me on that. We got to go back to look at that. But I think it might be weekly. Your first aid kit's got to be inspected weekly. But if it wasn't, and someone wind up getting hurt and they go to the first aid kit and they find nothing in it because people are using it all year, well, that's a problem. So again, first aid's not top 10, but it's out there. fire protection, portable fire extinguishers, provided and readily accessible. I don't know if you guys have anybody who use on-site portable fire extinguishers. Looking for training, portable fire extinguisher training. 59 times they cited companies for no training of their, what I mostly do is for companies who have portable fire extinguishers, but tell their people it's a secondary source. The first source is get out. But if you need to know how to use a fire extinguisher, your employer should probably train you on it. Even though their ultimate plan is don't use it, get out. But if it's an incipient type fire and you have fire extinguishers there, you should probably train your people in fire extinguisher use. How many hours? I don't know. It's up to you. It could be 5 minutes. But we basically teach them pass. Pull the pin, aim at the base, squeeze the handle, and sweep. That's pass. That's how we teach people in fire extinguisher usage. Visual inspection, monthly, should be done by somebody in-house, making sure that it's there, making sure that nothing's been ripped off, it's not been discharged. Annual maintenance checks are usually done by an outside source because it's more technical, more equipment-based. Provided and readily accessible, number one. How many times you have fire extinguishers hanging there with, I don't know, a pallet laying against it or shovels laying against their equipment? It's got to be readily accessible. This is why safety people should be walking around your facility all the time looking at these things, making sure these things are readily accessible in there. Ensure fully charged and operable condition. That's been done before. People blow off a fire extinguisher, see they got half in there, and they put it back on the rack again. No such thing as a half loaded extinguisher. It's either fully charged or it's not charged. If it's used, we need to report this to the safety department for some reason, because it shouldn't be getting used. If it was used, it means it was a problem. And then put it in an area where outside people come in and take it and recharge it for you. All under subpart L. Subpart M, there's your compressed gas, compressed air, material handling and storage. There's your power industrial truck. Competency training, number 178, L11. Basically, when you do power industrial truck training, you got to do hands-on. I just did that for the state last week, and now I got to go up north to Denimora and do some more training for their lift truck operators. But basically, it's classroom and hands-on.
Jeff, before you get too far past, there's a question about the first aid training. Go back. I will also give you a chance to take a breath.
Thank you.
For first aid training, can you rely on volunteer companies if you are in remote rural areas when you dial 911, or is it just based on the time frame that they need to be there in 10 minutes? So
no, fine. Volunteers, fine. I would say tap into your local emergency response plan. Call your local police, fire, non-emergency number, and speak with them about their response timing and who is coming. It's not because it's volunteer or paid. It's who do you have coming? Is it BLS, which is basic life support, which is like EMTs and stuff like that, or is it ALS, advanced life support? I would say in some of your areas, you're probably only going to get a BLS response, but no, you volunteer or paid, either way, doesn't matter as long as you have response coming within, I would say, in 10 minutes, if you're talking about serious issues, and just make sure they're there on site and make sure they can provide basic life support. Don't care if it's volunteer or not.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Perfect example is the town of Colony where I live. Great organization, great EMS. But believe it or not, in many areas in the town of Colony, you're getting volunteers initially. You're getting the local volunteer fire departments racing out and helping the EMS get there on time. But no, it doesn't really matter as long as it's BLS, basic life support, and they got some first aid, CPR, and hopefully EMT skills, but it doesn't really matter if it's volunteer or paid.
Okay, great. Thank you.
So we're talking about material handling. Your power industrial trucks, I assume you probably have quite a bit of people on the call that have lift trucks. And we said the training has to be done. It's not every year, it's every 3 years as you're hands-on, but basically competency training. So what we do is we do a little bit of a lecture, PowerPoint, going over the requirements. And then most of it is jump on a lift truck and show me your skills. Show me you know how to do a daily inspection. Show me you know how to lift up a certain material in the conditions that you work in. You know, do you have ramps? Do you have dock locks? Do you have areas where you're stacking? You know, do you have attachments that you're gonna have to put on the forks? Because if you do, you're gonna be able to read the data plate and know what your numbers are, what your capacities are. You know, so you know, look at the competency training. So apparently 372 times OSHA went into an organization and they did an investigation. They determined that they did not have adequate competency driven training. It was sit down, here's your PowerPoint, read it, you're trained. It's not the way you do power industrial truck training. It's specific to the truck. Different classes, all different classes of trucks you have out there. Certification training, you got to certify that you did it. And there's certain information that has to be on it. What type of truck? You know, who did the training? You know, that's all on that certificate. Refresher training in relevant topics. Again, refresher training for a power industrial truck, it's every 3 years. That's when you got to do your hands-on training. Safe operating conditions shall be examined before and placed in service. Power industrial trucks shall be examined by maybe your maintenance people, making sure it's adequate before it's put into service, and then probably on a frequent basis thereafter. But the biggest thing for power industrial truck is one of the biggest things I see coming up is the training, you know, and again, it should be done by someone who is knowledgeable. Doesn't have to be a consultant. It could be internal, but it's got to involve lecture and hands-on with a checklist. I give all my, and the last class I did for the state, out of 20 of them, 5 of them failed. And now, I'm not saying they're not getting a certificate. They're getting a certificate if they complete the class, but that checklist that I gave the employer, I put right on the bottom. Do not advise to allow them to be authorized and certified equipment operators. No, additional training required. That's what I put on them. Why? Because they couldn't get under the concept of how trucks work. Power industrial trucks turn from the back. They have 0 turn point. You can turn right on a dime on them. You know, people, if you're not knowledgeable in that, you don't have experience in that, you can't be using it yet. You're not, you know, the 5 guys that I failed, they even admitted it. They say, yeah, I can't drive that. They just didn't have the skills to do it yet. But did they complete the class? Yes, but I'm not letting them, I'm telling the employer I wouldn't let them drive it without more training. So you have to assess that during your training class. Are they competent enough to do it? And let me tell you something, that competency training is not with only lift trucks. That's pretty much with everything. OSHA doesn't care about the training so much, they care about the competency of the person. That's why when I do confined space training or lockout, tagout training, I'm driving to competency. Every one of my training, there's a checklist I use. It's a checklist that I provide to the employer to say, hey, I'm not the employer, I'm your consultant, but I'm saying they did good at this, they did good at this, but no, not here. What does that mean? That means maybe they're not ready for lockout, tagout yet. Maybe they need additional training. The same thing with power industrial trucks. Machine and machine guarding. General requirements, anything that has a potential for cutting or shooting things out at you, basically need to be guarded. And this is a big one under subpart O. So if I go down to here and go to subpart O, machinery, machine guarding, general requirements, it basically says types of guarding. One or more method of machine guarding shall be provided to protect operator or other employees in the machine area for hazards such as those created by operation, point of operation, ingoing nip points, rotating parts, flying chips and sparks. Examples of guarding methods are different types of barriers. Could be electronic safety devices, could be two-handed trip devices. General requirements, basically, again, point of operation. Point of operation is where the machine actually does its work. So examples of point of operation right here, guillotine, shears, alligator shears, that's point of, they need to be guarded. So we do a walk around at your site and we look for these things. I got this thing called the gotcha stick. It tells you openings, how close you can get to a part, the opening that needs to be guarded. It's pretty cool. It's called a gotcha stick. It helps me determine where guards have to be placed. But machine guarding is a big one. I don't know if it was top 10 again. Yeah, number 2, types of guards. Amputations is a big one in OSHA. It was a national emphasis program last year. So if I am an EHS manager and I find out that OSHA has a national emphasis program on amputations, I'm turning my safety department and saying, hey, machine guarding, we better be on our mark. Because if OSHA comes into this site, they're probably looking for machine guarding issues because that's how amputations happen quite a bit. So we covered all the top 10 ones. I want to go back here. We went further than the top 10 ones. I looked at additional ones, but let me go. Right here, under OSHA, national emphasis programs. Let's see if they got combustible dust. That's a big one. We're not covering that here today, but I don't know if you guys ever seen a combustible dust explosion. Not good. Not good at all. They're worse than flammable explosion. Combustible dust explosions often have 2 explosions. The first explosion and then a secondary explosion when the dust gets even more finite. There's a whole standard on combustible dust. I'm getting a lot of calls on that. And then coronavirus, national emphasis program. As of March 2021. I don't know how you guys weather a storm on that one, but I had a lot of clients that called me about coronavirus compliance. And I said, obviously there is no OSHA regulation on coronavirus, but OSHA said from day one, from this whole pandemic, that they want every employer to assure their employees are safe. How do we do that? Well, we have to go by state and local and federal CDC guidelines. And OSHA basically said that if we come into your facility and you're not following the CDC and you're not following state standards and someone gets sick, general duty clause. Remember I talked about the general duty clause earlier? They said all coronavirus citations will be probably falling under the general duty clause. So if you wind up someone at your site winds up coming down the coronavirus and somehow, some way OSHA gets involved with it, and OSHA gets in your facility and finds out that you did not have some kind of checklist in the morning. You didn't do temperature checks. You didn't have training. All that stuff that the CDC and OSHA is recommending, well, you failed to keep your people what? Safe from recognized serious hazards and illnesses. That company can get a general duty clause citation for coronavirus. So there's a national emphasis program on, you guys know what national emphasis mean, right? It means that they're going after it. It's an emphasis under OSHA. Hazardous machinery. Hexchrome, that's been going on for a while. That goes back to 2010. There's your lead one. Anybody exposed to lead? That goes back to 2008. I remember that one. Silica. That's still a big one. That's 2020. I don't know if you guys have any exposure to that, but some manufacturing sites do, and a lot of construction sites do when they work with concrete and things like that, excavation. So I would say for you guys in this class, top 3, sometimes top 4, if you're dealing with hexchrome. Combustible dust, if you deal with that you might want to look into because they're coming after you. That's what they're telling you. Coronavirus, making sure you're following all CDC guidelines and everything on that. So that's a national emphasis program. Let's go back one here. Do they have any local ones? New York. Well, by the way, we're region 2 for OSHA. Dairy farm operations, local emphasis program since 98. I'm sorry, 2008, 19. Heavy highway. Let's see if anything has to do with you guys. Not really. Construction work sites, Virgin Island general industry. Heavy highway, wood, nothing real locally. Well, I guess you got noise hazards. Warehouse, refuse handling and haulers. I look at these all the time too, because I'm not really an ambulance chaser, but I do see these coming and I say, oh, maybe I want to make a phone call to some of these guys, make them aware that they're under the microscope under OSHA. Because OSHA sends out these national emphasis programs, local emphasis program all the time to make you guys just aware that this is what they're going after. This is a big problem. All right, so I'm going to start closing this down. I usually have a opportunity 10-15 minutes at the end to do some discussions. We don't have that ability now, but does anybody have any?
Jeff, I think we probably can have people unmute if they want to have that conversation. I don't know if Johnny Ann is here.
I am.
Yes,
I'm here.
Can we do that just to see if there's anybody have any questions?
Yeah, I think it works if people raise their hand, but I could just go ahead and click the button and see.
Jeff, can you unshare your screen?
I don't need that on my end, but.
Well,
Oh, there you go. Yeah. Because usually what I do when I do classes like this, I keep them all on that. I can do it. I can have discussions as I go through.
Yeah, so I click the button that allows participants to unmute and they, oh, there you go, Ken, go ahead.
All right, so is there different training for your normal forklifts versus the scissor lifts that are out there in the workplace?
Forklifts and scissor lifts,
Correct.
big difference.
That's what I thought.
Yep, forklift is a material handling device that lifts up equipment and things like that. Scissor lift, that lifts up people. That's a mobile elevated work platform.
So we go under the mobile work platform in regards to the scissor lift.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yep. And the core truck would be under material handling. Big differences between those two. And when you're talking about mobile elevated work platforms, like most of the people that work for us, we don't even have an operator. That's an operator class. See, what people don't realize, when I come out and do safety classes, I'm doing safety. I'm not necessarily doing operator training. So a lot of times, like what's the one down there? All lifts. If you rent from them or you rent from different companies, they will actually do a training class with you when they deliver it. It might not be safety, it's more operational. So all our people that go on mobile elevated work platforms, all our people have fall protection training for that, because we don't operate it, but we should know that we need to have fall arrest when we're in it. But the ANSI standard for mobile elevated work platforms requires the operator to make sure everybody on that knows about fall protection requirements too. But the long and short of your question is big differences.
Thanks, Jeff. Thanks, Ken. Any other questions out there, comments? I'm hearing none. It was there was a lot of information, a lot of very useful information there. I feel like I picked up a lot myself, and I fortunately don't have to live this every day like everybody else does. It's a little bit of my blessing. So I'll give people another few seconds here. Jeff, was there any other final thoughts you had or things you want to wrap up with? I mean, obviously, wealth of information. Chasen's been a great member. If you want to reach out to him, we'll share with the participants. We'll share his contact information and the slides, as well as his bio. So give a final countdown for questions, and then we'll give Jeff a chance to sign off.
Yeah, I don't see anybody else unmuting, so I think we're good to move forward.
Very good. Final thoughts, Jeff?
Well, I want to tell everybody, thank you so much for your time. I hope it helped out a little bit. Just want to go over one of the, 10 of the top 10s in your industry that are out there, and go over some of the national emphasis program that we're seeing coming down the line. Again, here's your time to talk to me for free. I'd be more than happy to help you out with any questions you have. The first aid question was great. That does come up a lot about the 911 thing. I would say most people are probably covered for the most part under 911, but I am seeing a lot more companies go with CPR first aid training, because I'll tell you one thing about getting people on board. That first aid CPR training is a great offering to your employees, because that's something they're going to use more or less at home than at work. So if you can show them that, hey, you're committed to their overall safety and their family, it's not a bad added benefit. You know, I tell people that all the time, that when I'm teaching CPR first aid, that, you know, 90+% of the time, it's going to be something you're doing to your family member. You know, so
we have found that to be true as well. And I know that's actually something we've done with the related instruction for the apprentice program. That is a class that we've offered for those folks as well, just for that same reason, Jeff. It's just, it's good everywhere, not just at the workplace.
This is great. Thanks so much, Jeff. We really appreciate it.
yeah, thank you so much. I appreciate it.
And as I mentioned, this is being recorded, so we'll post it on our website. And for those of you who sent a separate email, we'll make sure we loop back, but it'll be Jeff's contact information and, you know, sort of bio and offerings, as well as the slides from today and the video from this recording as well. So thanks for everything. And until next time.